we got somebody in the crowd.
The functionality or the production, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
So
correct.
if it's necessary to the production,
With the production also has to be in the end product. Production and end product. In the proposed rule, it was not a part of the end product, so it was a little bit wider. When the final rule came out, it clarified production process and end product. And with food and beverage, as the minerals aren't in the end product, perhaps, if one concludes that your product is just the food and the beverage that you sell, then the production process therefore would be scoped out. And what they specifically said is if the minerals are used as a catalyst, it would not be included as part of your reporting on Form SD. And what they're trying to do, I think, is to just get to what you deem your product is and what you sell in the marketplace and the minerals tied to that, as opposed to your production process.
I'm when the utility industry, so our product is
Can you just
electricity.
come?
Machinery and equipment.
Yep.
The inclusion by the SEC in their little carve-out, which I thought they seem to think it helped clarify by using the word power line, has actually created a lot of confusion. We're more concerned with, customized pieces of equipment that are used to generate that in our hands would be, I guess, they're necessary to the production of our product. But my question is, has there been any sort of consensus as to whether those things are going to come under the tool exemption?
Again, if it is not in the final product, then, the necessary to functionality doesn't play a part in us, at least as far as the SEC rule is concerned. So it depends on what you define. I mean, from a purely legal point of view, if it depends on what your product is. Your product is electricity, then, then it's not in the product. But again, there's a wider implication for this, which is, your brand and, what your public perceptions. Those are all things that you need to think about as well.
To
But
give another
I guess the
example,
question could be, is the product electricity, or is the product getting the electricity to my house where I can use it, right? And if it has to come over lines that are full of these minerals.
Really good point. And I think another example in the telecoms area is your product the minutes that you sell for the cell phone, or is it the actual cell phone itself? If you argue it's the minutes, then you would come to the conclusion that the minerals are not in the end product. However, if you conclude that the cell phone, you design it yourself, contract and manufacture, then can the cell phone ring without the transformers in the sky? Then one could perhaps come to the conclusion those transformers are necessary to the functionality of your product, which is the cell phone.
Yeah. Again, like I said, it comes down to how innovative your legal department is, right? That's in the SEC, one of the letters from the telecom companies is, we are not a telecom company, we are a retailer. We only sell minutes. So it's, if it comes down to how you define it.
And particularly if you're a major end user, or the industry is a major end user of one particular mineral. So, for example, for tin, the majority of tin, a lot of people don't know this, it goes into solder, right? 53% goes into solder, which is mostly in electronics on circuit boards, basically acting as a glue on circuit boards. The second major end use for tin is cans. And so, various types of cans, I think, are going to be quite important, and I think that consumers can be interested in that.
Based on what we said earlier about packaging, is the can included as part of this product or not?
That's the question we've done such a poor job of answering.
Because I don't see the logic if it's not, this is the only way you're gonna get this to us is, a can of pop is with the can. So if the objective is to stop the flow of conflict minerals, and conflict minerals are in this can, why would you exclude it? Particularly, using this as an example, a pretty widespread use of tin. What is the logic behind not using the can?
A minimalist view?
Yeah.
Or an argument that you could sell it in a plastic
Bob.
container.
It's not necessary to the functionality, I think, would
There's
be the
other ways
perspective.
of the product.
If you were to design that can in a way to your specifications, then you're in a contract to manufacture. You probably would come to the conclusion it's necessary to the functionality by virtue of you contracting to manufacture. If you're buying the can off the shelf and do not have any influence over the can, the company that sold the can would have the reporting obligation if they were publicly traded. So what it avoids is double reporting on the same product.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, that if you don't include it, doesn't mean it's not going to get included. Somebody else who actually manufactured the can would be covering it.
That's correct.
Somebody manufactured it, yeah.
XYZ publicly traded can making company.
Well, unless they're a private company,
Private, yeah.
then somebody doesn't have to report it.
So,
If I contract to manufacture a product, but the only thing I specify are performance aspects, like this roll of tape must have a certain adhesion or something like that, I don't tell the manufacturer how to make it. Just going to Jim's point about to what extent with the bottle or the can, you set a performance specification,
Yeah.
like it has to keep the CO2 in, for
Yeah.
the soda. But I think if we're just specifying performance and not telling them how to get that performance, would that be an example where there's little enough control to say that I'm not actually responsible?
The SEC was kind enough not to define degree of influence in the final rule,
Yeah.
but I believe they word it as some degree of influence, and I believe if it's a performance condition, irrespective of how they achieve that performance condition, that could kick you into contract and manufacture, because they're making it based on what you request.
I'll add to that Retail Industry Leaders Association, RELA, Target and Best Buy are members of that as well here, has been working on. I mean, they went through this process, I think, as recently as last week to say, what are the questions you would ask in order to say whether we are contracting to manufacture or not, right? And there is no consensus on that yet because exactly to your point, there are different views, but they're trying to come up with some very specific questions by which the industry can then say, here's how I define contract to manufacturer, just so that one retailer is not completely out of step with the others. It may take a little while, but the last round of questions that I saw coming out of that was, something like that could get excluded, and that was one of the issues that some of the participants had with that. I mean, you can say, hey, you know what, I want, for example, a connector. I want a highly conducting connector that will perform under exceedingly these kind of situations where you're all but saying I need a gold connector, right? I mean, does it say that you are including gold in it? So those are the kinds of things that language is what currently people are playing around with right now.
Yes.
same logic with back to the can, same logic for electronic components. Intel, I have no influence, I want their chip. Hitachi hard drives, I don't know what goes into the guts of that, I need that drive. Does that same logic we assume or do the due diligence to say Intel is making that certification, that's the extent I need to go?
For purposes, I mean, what you're trying to do is step one to see whether or not you're scoped in and would have a potential filing requirement. I think that if you've got absolutely no influence and you're just buying the chip from Intel or SanDisk or whoever it may be, then you would conclude that you have no influence over the actual manufacturing of that product. It's just you're making a spread on it by putting it into whatever product that you have, and you probably would conclude in that scenario that it's not scoped in. I don't know, Bala or Sasha, you think differently?
Yeah, so if you take, again, I look at it from two different industries' point of view. When I work with retailers, say if I'm just taking the SanDisk chip and then, or rather a piece of memory or whatever, and I'm selling it in my store without making any changes to it, then I'm not on the hook for it. SanDisk is on the hook to answer for that. But if I'm taking a chip from some company and building on it, putting some capacitors, resistors around it on a motherboard and building a completely different product out of it, then I have to turn to SanDisk or to Intel and say, hey, Intel or SanDisk, where did you get it from? Because now you are far part of my product, I have to report out on it.
And you might simply look to their Form SD, perhaps, as certification for their products and what they've done.
Well, you still have to send them your EICC JC questionnaire and ask them which smelters
Yeah.
they came from.
So if you've got a circuit card, 1,500 different components, the obligation then is to go down. I mean, because in your logic, we are driving it. You buy the chip, nobody does anything with just the chip, right? So we're driving it, we're making it do what we want it to do. So if there's 1,500 components on that BOM, 1,500 audits.
I wouldn't use the word audit. I mean, yeah, but then it depends. Not everything may have 3TG in it. You may, I mean, it may or may not. Whatever it is. And then again, you may have one supplier that may supply 250 of them. So, you may decide to do it at the supplier level.
I'm just trying to scope.
Right.
It may be 3 components.
Right. Okay.
I'm painting a picture.
Right. Electronics is the most complex because most products tend to have it. I mean, most components tend to have it. And they tend to have all 4 metals. But it's also the most developed industry, matured industry in terms of giving you responses.
Yeah, I'd say the chip manufacturers are the most far advanced on the issue, so those are the ones you have to worry about the least.
I'm trying to scope my work, right?
I see the dark cloud hanging over there.
I'm going to jump ahead to keep us on track. There's one question here, we'll take that.
Just one question on legal entity scope. Are we able to scope out companies that are accounted for as a cost or an equity investment?
The question is, are you able to scope out cost or equity method investments in joint ventures or other legal entities? That's a real good question because it gets back to all the different legal entities that you have within your organization that you might have to do some due diligence. The way that we've thought about it, because it's the 10K, we thought that all consolidated entities would obviously be scoped in. What we've seen is companies, from a branding perspective, scope in joint ventures and cost method investments because it has the same name as your company perhaps, so they would expand the scope beyond there. But there's nothing in the final rule that says what legal entities are scoped in or scoped out. I think that the approach that companies took with Sarbanes-Oxley back in 03 and 04 with respect to joint ventures and equity method investments might be a similar approach. However, it gets back to your philosophy and your strategy, and a lot of companies being conservative in year one will include just because of the branding recognition of those joint ventures. But we always point back to the 10K filing as a point of reference.
The great news is, with all your questions, we kind of covered the things we were covering the last 3 slides, so you didn't really miss anything, so that's fantastic. So you guys were reading ahead, which is always helpful. But just to wrap up, if you're getting started now, words of advice?
Never too late to get started. I mean, it's, again, we go back to the same points again and again to use the next couple of months to develop a strategy. Again, if you are going to ask your suppliers to report out for the year 2013, you at least have to give them a heads up before the end of 2012 and say, we are going to send you a questionnaire, you have to answer, please familiarize yourself with this, with this law and what we're going to ask you. And then identifying the stakeholders within your company and then developing a policy around it. Those to me are the key first steps.
Yeah, I would agree. Internal stakeholders, governance within your organization, tone at the top, CEO getting involved, but also perhaps understanding other legislation within the United States and around the world where you would avoid duplicating efforts. If you can combine them as part of one effort, then perhaps there could be some savings there.
I would just add that, from our standpoint, we really want to highlight the good work of the leading companies. And so, we definitely have an open door policy and more than happy to talk to any of you. We've been trying to educate companies and the public about this since 2008. So more than happy to follow up with any of you.
Amy, any final legal words?
I think we've covered it.
I think we've covered it. All right. Well, I'd like to, again, remind you about the CP credit green sheets on the tables. Please take care of those so that you get your CP and CLE. And if we could just give the panel a round of applause. I think they did a great job. Thanks very much for coming.